So welcome everybody to the RSI Work Injury Support Group at Mount Sinai. I think I blew that. It's the Work Injury Support Group at Mount Sinai. And here with us is Jonathan Dropkin, who was kind enough to invite me once again to talk to you all. I'm so happy to see you. And if people are interested in joining your group, Jonathan, can you tell them how to go about that?
Yeah, sure. I hope everyone can hear me. So the Mount Sinai Selikoff Center in New York City, the Upper East Side, you could contact them and basically just ask them to contact me. I don't want to give you my email because it's really long, but basically Selikoff at Mount Sinai, the Selikoff Occupational Health Clinical Center, just contact anyone there and they'll
Well,
know
we
how
can put it in the link in the description. I can put your email.
there you
So
have it.
that'll
Okay,
solve
great.
that.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, my email is just, we'll put that in.
Yeah, too much to say. But it's important when you have RSI. It's really nice to know other people who have it too. It could be very comforting. So, find your local RSI support group and support it. And we're trying to do that here too with these live streams. And we've got some interesting topics coming up, so I will mention those at the end. But for today, we're going to talk about studies on RSI. And Jonathan and I were talking about the problem with these studies a while ago. And let me see if I can. When we came up with this topic of doing studies, I thought, great idea, but mainly it was because I wanted to sound off on the paucity of good studies and what I think would be really useful to be studied for RSI. And so Jonathan and I were sort of going back and forth about that. And we said, well, let's do that for the next group meeting. And I immediately regretted it. And the reason why I regretted it is because I read a lot of studies because I'm always looking for things that might be helpful for people with RSI. And I thought, giving a talk about it would be interesting. And then I thought, no, it's going to be so boring. It's going to put everybody to sleep. But that's the good news. So if you find the topic of medical studies boring, you can do two things. You can try to read them yourself, and you'll probably be off to sleepy land by paragraph 3. Or you can play this, just put on this live stream and in the background on your phone somewhere and listen to my voice droning on and on about studies. And that will definitely put you to sleep. I put people to sleep all the time. So, but seriously, I really hope that researchers will do truly useful studies that will help people with repetitive strain injury. And I have a few ideas that I think would be good that I'll talk about in a minute. But first of all, I want to talk about the importance of studies, and jump in if you have anything to add, Jonathan. But there was an article on the National Library of Medicine website, and they talk about how research is valuable to society. It can provide important information about disease trends, risks, and risk factors, the outcome of treatment or public health interventions, and healthcare costs. Clinical trials can provide important information about the efficacy and adverse effects of medical interventions by controlling the variables that could impact the results of the study. But also they need feedback from real-life clinicians that can compare and improve treatments and diagnostics. So health studies can help provide physicians with standard of care practices and information about things that work and things that don't work. This is the ideal. Unfortunately, not every study lives up to this ideal. When I read studies about RSI, I often ask this question to myself, but what about the patients? What about the patients? Very often, they just seem left out to me. I question why people study the things they do when there are other pressing questions they could be asking. And I also wonder how much the researchers actually know about repetitive strain injury. Let me give you an example. Here's a study on repetitive strain injury and esports competitors, otherwise known as gamers. It discusses how competitive video games is a growing industry with thousands of competitors. Playing video games at a professional level requires considerable finger dexterity. The player must perform quick control button presses and stick movements and keyboard or mouse clicks. The study found that one champion played for 12 hours a day with 1 or 2 days off per month. They note that the risk of RSI from gaming may be significant. That is an understatement. They also note that the extent of injury remains scarcely researched. That too is an understatement. Then they explain some anatomy and a few variations of RSI that you could get from playing games. They quote one gamer who said he had been practicing for more than 10 hours a day until he started feeling numbness and pain in his wrist and was diagnosed with carpal tunnel syndrome. He subsequently retired from the game. Though he made an attempt to return to play, carpal tunnel syndrome kept him from playing competitively. This is what the study said. I wonder what else carpal tunnel prevented him from doing. Could he drive anymore? How was it when he was trying to lift up a coffee mug or something? But that question was not addressed. The study concludes that as the gaming industry continues to grow and more players participate, it's likely that more people will be putting themselves at risk for RSI. Again, understatement. They say that further research could focus on gamer athletes to determine their risk for specific RSI. Why aren't they looking at the whole picture here? Why specific risk? Then they say that research into the prevention of RSI could lead to the development of ergonomic devices for esport competitors to reduce the occurrence of injuries. This has so many problems with it. Did they not read their own study about how long these players were playing? 10 to 12 hours per day, and some of them go longer. No amount of ergonomic adjustment will make it safe for people to be playing games for 10 to 12 hours on end. Furthermore, there was no discussion of technique, force, the amount of force that they're using, the shape of the tools, and the concomitant awkward strained position that the tool puts the gamer in, or how much force the players were using to press the keys or grip the controller. People tend to overgrip, and when they get excited, they tend to wail on whatever happens to be in front of them, whether it's the mouse or the keyboard. They were not looking at the posture of the gamers, which often include forward head posture, slouching into a chair, and possibly resting their forearms on armrests or the edge of the desk. And all of those are risk factors for injury. There are many risk factors for repetitive strain injury that were certainly not addressed in this study, and many others. Ergonomics alone cannot solve this problem, nor can it address the addictive nature of these games. They are designed to be addictive. I will spare you any further examples of that sort of study. There was a far more perceptive study from 1999, and even though it's old, I would like to mention it here because I think it's probably still timely. It reminded me of the often quoted saying attributed to the famed Canadian physician William Osler, and I don't think you can get through medical school even today without reading his work. He said, "Listen to the patient. He is telling you the diagnosis." This quote cannot be found in any of his published works, but whoever said it was right, according to the doctors I have spoken to. The study drew on evidence from 2 studies concerning seemingly quite diverse medical conditions, repetitive strain injury and childhood cancer. The studies were carried out independently and were not originally undertaken to compare experiences of diagnosis, but pointed to the unexpected similarities between the results, particularly around the issue of patients and parents feeling their views and experiences were not taken seriously by medical professionals. This study, published in Social Science and Medicine in 1999, draws on evidence from these two quite different conditions, repetitive strain injury and childhood cancer. And it suggests that a number of patients and the parents of children with cancer felt their experience and knowledge were disregarded by doctors in the diagnostic process, denying the validity of an individual's perception had implications in obtaining an accurate diagnosis, which could in turn make access to appropriate health care and treatment problematic. If you're not getting the right diagnosis, or if you're blown off in the office, you won't get the treatment. You won't get the prescription that will be covered by insurance. There's all kinds of things that you won't be followed up properly. All kinds of things can go wrong because of this. Their experience led some people with RSI to show a general distrust of medicine. Think about that. They don't trust medicine anymore because they didn't feel that their doctor was listening to them. This is a problem. And interestingly enough, this was less of a case for the parents of children with cancer. It was more of a problem with people with RSI. This study talks about the importance of patients feeling empowered in the medical process. Empowerment requires adequate knowledge to manage illness and access to appropriate treatment resources. It also requires energy to act and take control, but emotional and physical vulnerabilities associated with illness and the difficulties of demanding and upholding one's rights when the patient is physically weak, anxious, and uncertain may make this problematic. That's sort of an understatement. It's really hard for patients to stand up to doctors. Doctors are the authority figure. And unfortunately, a lot of people tell me their doctors are sort of checking their watch, which I'm not blaming doctors because the insurance companies very often don't give them time to really do the kind of job that they would like to do. But still, it's a problem. The researchers examined whether patients and parents felt their views count, exercise choice in seeking options, other options, and are able to shift from one referral pathway to another and withdraw trust from medical practitioners if the diagnosis is contested. Establishing the correct diagnosis or label for a patient's symptoms is central to medical practice and to the patient's access to further medical resources. It leads backwards to the pathogenesis or the origin of the injury, and forward to practical and effective treatment interventions, including referral routes to specialists in particular disciplines. There is also much wider implications in the sense that by acknowledging that an individual is suffering from a recognized health condition, doctors have the power to attribute certain rights to the ill person. From the social point of view, doctors can validate the patient's illness. They can take away the blame from the individual by putting responsibility on environmental factors, such as poor ergonomics or poor technique or something like that. And this is really important when it comes to occupational diseases. It wasn't your fault. You were doing your job, and that's why you were injured. Didn't have the proper equipment, didn't have the proper training. All these things can factor in, and then, the patient doesn't get the proper care. It's the kind of thing that breaks my heart. Economically, doctors can influence claims to state and or health insurance benefits and special services. Your doctor can stand up for you and say, yes, you need this amount of physical therapy or whatever it is you need. Time off, better workstation, whatever it is you need. Doctor has the power for that. A diagnosis also offers the patient the opportunity to find out the disease in question, alternative treatments, and ways to cope better. These are all things a doctor can do for you if they make the proper diagnosis and treatment plan. If not, the patient is left without a diagnosis or what to do about it. They're just twisting in the wind and getting worse. You really need treatment right away for RSI, and very few people get that. The task of interpretation and the role of doctors as gatekeepers to treatment and other healthcare resources stresses the importance of the interaction between the patient and the professional and the communication skills of each party. One important dimension is the ability of the doctor to elicit descriptions of symptoms and to actively listen to the patient's message without closing the interaction too early, without blowing them off or moving on. Being listened to is a crucial stage in the process of empowerment, yet a considerable body of research points to problems in doctor-patient communications and lack of training of medical professionals in communication skills. Doctors' interactions with patients have been found to be characterized by the use of closed rather than open questions, little encouragement for patients to initiate discussion, and a low level of patient-centeredness. Think about that. It should be about the patient, in my opinion. Ideally, diagnostic interactions ought to center around the sharing of patients' and professionals' different but complementary expertise. You're the expert in your own body. Bringing doctors' medical expertise and knowledge to bear upon the patient's own experiential expertise, resulting in particular decisions being taken and paths toward diagnosis being identified. In addition, the recent proliferation of medical information through the popular media and support and self-help groups has served to disseminate information which previously might have remained within the spheres of professional elites. Given this relative ease of access, there is considerable potential for ordinary people to develop an in-depth knowledge and understanding about medical matters, which can itself contribute to diagnosis. Now, I'd like to jump in here with my caveat, very strong caveat. People tend to rely on the internet and self-help groups inappropriately. They can be enormously beneficial in some ways, such as getting social support, but they are both great sources of misinformation and very bad advice, which is also why it's important to be guided by a knowledgeable, trusted, and caring physician. This is really important. I mean, the number of people who have told me that they did something that they saw on the internet in some support group and got so much worse it's a problem. However, the tendency within the medical culture to depersonalize, objectify, and narrow the focus of diagnostic interactions stands in opposition to achieving such collaborative diagnostic encounters. A further attention concerns the power relationship between the doctor and the patient. Medicine's claim to esoteric knowledge and expertise means that more often than not, the physician occupies the dominant position. The patient, on the other hand, is dependent and submissive. The implication is that even though the medical consultation traditionally involves questioning and interpretation, communication within this sort of model tends to follow a certain pattern. Details about symptoms and complaints flow in the direction of the patient to the doctor. Information about diagnosis and appropriate treatment flow in the other. One consequence in terms of diagnostic test results, for example, is that if such results conflict with the patient's account, less priority may be accorded the patient's subjective reporting of symptoms. What if you tell your doctor, hey, that didn't work for me? How did that go? The authors of this study suggest that patients can assume a role in diagnosing the disease they are suffering from, and that doctors listen to them. The patient's contribution has the potential to be all the more central where the given diagnosis conflicts with the patient's own view of his or her illness. The initial problem of not being listened to during interactions with professionals can mean that both diagnosis and access to appropriate health care can be adversely affected. So when Jonathan and I were discussing this topic, he brought up the fact that a lot of people who are writing these studies have never seen patients clinically. And I thought that was really an important point. There's a world of difference in studies based on people who actually see and treat people with RSI and academic researchers who do not. One example of this is from the co-author of my first book, Dr. Emil Pasquarelli. He pointed out in one of his studies, very dryly, that physicians often limit their examinations to areas below the elbow. RSI most frequently starts higher than that, commonly in the neck from the forward head position, and the nerves that emanate from the cervical spine go under the collarbone through the brachial plexus and down the arm. And so you can get symptoms that sort of are like carpal tunnel syndrome, but they're not carpal tunnel syndrome. They start way farther up. He attributed the high prevalence of the rate of carpal tunnel syndrome diagnoses from this lack of a thorough examination. In his study, only 8% of these people examined actually had carpal tunnel syndrome. A nerve impingement can start in the neck and lead to similar sensations. Unfortunately, a carpal tunnel release will not address this problem, and many people have had unnecessary surgeries as a result. They didn't even have carpal tunnel syndrome. And one time I was in the room with Dr. Pasquarelli. I sat in with him and I was listening to the patients, taking notes and learning during this process of writing the book. And so many people said the doctor gave them the surgery because there was nothing else to do. Well, excuse me, you don't do an unnecessary surgery because there's nothing else to do. You don't do the surgery and make things worse. You know, cutting the flexor retinaculum is complex, but it's not something you want to do unless you really, really have to. So there have been people who've had very unhappy results with carpal tunnel surgeries, whether they needed it or not. So it's not something that I would recommend you undergo without getting a second opinion and trying everything else, if possible. Sometimes you need it. So Dr. Pasquarelli also encouraged doctors to use a hands-on approach and not put a machine between them and their patients. He was always complaining about these doctors who were always putting a machine between themselves and their patients. There are so many clinical tests that can give you all kinds of information, good, valid information about diagnosing various kinds of repetitive strain injury if you take the time to do them. A thorough examination takes about an hour and a half, 90 minutes. This is time most doctors cannot offer. And even if they knew how to perform all of these tests, a lot of doctors don't believe that computer use can lead to repetitive strain injury. But in a study by Mary Barb and Ann Barr, they found direct observation of tissues exposed to repetitive or forceful tasks, quoting another study that had used human biopsies. And it shows the presence of cellular pathology, cellular changes. The number of such tissue studies in humans is very small because of the invasiveness of the biopsy process. It's very painful, so that, they don't do it on humans. But Jonathan just told me that there may be news in that regard, which will be interesting. So what stands out to me regarding all these studies, and I've only given a few, is what's not being studied. Now, I have a few ideas, and maybe if these kind of issues were studied, they would make enough of an impact so that repetitive strain injury would get the kind of attention it deserves and the kind of legislative action it deserves. So, for instance, what is the rate of unemployment among people with RSI? There was one study that said that 9% of adults having RSI in the past 3 months in 2021, and men and women had similar reports of injuries, due to repetitive strain injury. But that doesn't seem high enough to me, because I don't know if they were counting people who were not employed at a job that would be counting these things. A lot of people don't want to go on workers' compensation, so they don't report. So to me, that number seems low. And I would also like to know the number of people with RSI who are unemployed because they've given up trying to find work, because it's so hard to find a job when you can't use your hands properly, normally. Then I'd like to know how much income people have lost because they lost their job and couldn't be reemployed. Maybe that would make people think twice about how they use their hands. I don't know. How does RSI, and this is a big one for me because I've been doing this for years, how does RSI affect people after 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? How many additional injuries do they have after their initial injury? It's been my observation that people frequently wind up with many more injuries than they started out with because of compensatory and substitution injuries. Tissue gets weak, you use your hand differently, you change hands, injure the right hand using the mouse, injure the left hand because you started using the mouse with your left hand. Very common. So I think this would be a very interesting study because you can't stop using your hands. I mean, even if you're not doing the offending activity that originally got you into trouble, you're still using your hands on a daily basis. And then I'd like to know, what is the average age of onset of RSI in 2024 compared with what it was like in the 90s? I should say 2023 because this year isn't ended. When I wrote my first book, people were in their 40s and 50s and 60s. That's the patient that we were seeing then. Most of those people had learned how to type on typewriters, and very often they had pretty good typing technique. Nowadays, I'm hearing from younger and younger people, including a 14-year-old who got RSI from gaming and wanted to get his hands back right away because he had some really important examinations coming in 3 weeks. He wanted his hands back. Then, this is another thing that I think would be interesting to know and important. How many people suffer from depression from RSI? An article in the American Psychiatric Association said chronic pain and mental health disorders often occur together. In fact, research suggests that chronic pain and mental health problems can contribute to and exacerbate the other. Now, I'm not saying that you get RSI because you're depressed. I don't think there's plenty of perfectly happy people who were just go-getters. They wanted to get that job done. They didn't know about RSI. They got it, and then it was really depressing because they couldn't afford their mortgage. They had to lose their job. I mean, they got fired. It's depressing. So people with chronic pain are at heightened risk for mental health problems, including, this is from the study, including depression, anxiety, and substance use disorders. Chronic pain can affect sleep, increase stress levels, and contribute to depression. An estimated 35 to 45% of people with chronic pain experience depression. Pain can also be a common symptom among people with an anxiety disorder, particularly generalized anxiety disorder, according to Anxiety and Depression Association of America. There is an Anxiety and Depression Association of America. Shows you, it's a sad commentary on our society, but there you go. I'm glad they have it. Good for them. Anxiety, depression, and other mood disorders commonly occur at the same time as chronic pain from conditions like fibromyalgia, back problems, migraines, and arthritis. And I think RSI. And then this is a dark question, but I would like to know how many people have committed suicide because of RSI. I've heard of a couple of cases, and I can't find specific studies, but I can tell you that it's people, something they say to me that alarms me. And maybe that would wake people up if there were a study or some attention to the Great Depression that people have because they can't use their hands. Some attention. I mean, I'm doing everything I can. I send out articles that get rejected, opinion pieces that get rejected. I try to get other people to do stories on it, but it's hard. If you can't use your hands normally, you've lost your job and all that entails. And it's hard for you to navigate daily life, opening doors, pressing elevator buttons, driving, dressing, cooking. A lot of people feel hopeless. Then there's another question. How many children have RSI? There was a study, small, but they were trying to determine the average time school children spend on computers and electronic games and the positions they assume and associated discomfort. A 23-point questionnaire was distributed to 476 children in the 1st to 8th grades from 3 parochial schools in one of the New York City boroughs. The findings of this study suggest that children use the computer and games differently than adults and that more boys than girls engage in gaming. Results clearly indicate that the children are experiencing discomfort in the use of computers and games, and that discomfort is largely concentrated in the neck. Occupational therapy could be instrumental in educating the children, their parents and guardians, and their teachers on proper body mechanics. Well, let's see how much luck you have getting a child to sit up straight. Applications of ergonomically suited workstations, the use of rest stretch breaks while engaged in computing and e-games. I wonder if any of these people have actually tried to stop their child from using a game. There was a really scary story on 60 Minutes in Australia about a child who would not go to school or come out of his room because he was so addicted to some computer game. The reporter sat with him and he kept gaming. He did not make eye contact with her. She was firing questions at him. He was looking and, killing people or doing the targets on his game. He had gotten so violent with his mother when she tried to get him to stop playing games that she gave up. So this idea of instituting rest and stretch breaks has me a little bit skeptical, shall we say. How many parents of those children are aware of the fact that they may be supporting their child into adulthood because that child will be unemployable because of repetitive strain injury? How many pediatricians know how to diagnose and treat repetitive strain injury? What are schools doing about preventing repetitive strain injury? I'm very concerned about this issue. When I wrote my first book in the 90s, I predicted that children would be injured. I wrote to 2 major pediatric societies, pleading with them to educate themselves about RSI. There was no response. The feeling at that time was the parents thought the kids need to know how to use computers because that's how they're going to be employed. What they didn't realize was that they could become unemployable because of that computer use and severely disabled to the point where they'd have trouble with activities of daily living. So this is attributable to computer use, gaming, and misuse of smartphones. That's a whole other area of injury. I propose that what is really needed are studies that take into account all the risk factors of repetitive strain injury. Maybe then the public health organizations would launch truly useful educational campaigns. At the moment, there is nothing. Maybe then manufacturers would design safer tools. But we cannot depend on ergonomics alone to prevent repetitive strain injury. There are too many other factors to consider. It doesn't matter if you address only one, because you can still get raging RSI from the ones you leave out. So I'm going to stop there. You're probably tired of hearing about these studies, but I did want to say before we open for comments and questions that we have some great new live streams coming up on my channel. And one of them will be about making your house RSI friendly, courtesy Alexandria Karstens, who is going to take us around and show us all the things that she's done to make her house more RSI friendly. And you can see from past episodes with Alexandria that she's very smart about this kind of thing. So I hope you all come and throw in your own suggestions of what you've done to your house. And that's scheduled for Wednesday, March 27th. And there will be another one about what newly injured people can learn from old timers. And I hope you'll come to that one because I think it's important for people who are newly injured to hear from people who've been there and done that. I think that would be an interesting thing for you all to attend to. I'm not sure of the date. So if you subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell, you will be alerted to when my live streams are up. You can also go to my channel to see old live streams or to look at the ones that are coming up. It's under the playlist called Live. There's a bunch of tabs and it's about the middle one in. And if you haven't already, could you please sign the Repetitive Strain Injury Bill of Rights, Patient Bill of Rights? This is so important. It's really important that we take some action. You may not be able to use your hands, but you can use your voice. You can vote. You can talk to your senators and representatives. I'm in the process of trying to talk to a few people who are interested in RSI and children's issues. But it's really important that we get some legislative action so that we can really prevent RSI and raise consciousness about it. You don't need to be a citizen of the United States or even injured to sign. You can sign for your friends. So, and thank you, Alexandria has just put the link up on the screen. So anyway, do we have any comments, questions? Oh, I see some here. Let me go and look. Moving pictures. Yes, this will be on my, she's asking whether this will be recorded. Is that showing? Yes. No, I can't tell. Anyway, Moving Pictures asked if this was being reported, and yes, it is. Thank you, Alexandria. And let's see if there's anything else. So, Jonathan, you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I actually have a question. That gamer, that professional gamer, how old was he?
I would guess, I don't think they mentioned in the study, but I just talked to someone who said that he was a gamer, and he said that most of the gamers nowadays are 13 or 14 because by the time they're older than that, they've blown their hands.
That's mind-boggling. It's exactly what you're talking about in terms of what you predicted 30 years ago, that younger and younger kids are going to get it because they're on the computers all the time. And once you're injured, you have the scarring for life.
Yeah.
Even though you could become asymptomatic, your threshold, your exposure threshold is lower before you can, until you develop symptoms. So it might be really hard for 20-somethings to be employed if they're working 12-hour days.
Yeah, it's the re-injury cycle. And it comes closer and closer until a point where people just, I tell everybody, work for yourself, because that's the only way that you can actually do a job. I have a question from Moving Pictures 99. Are there legislators and doctors who've had RSI? I have had at least probably over half a dozen doctors come to me. Well, actually more than that, come to me for consultations and ergonomic evaluations. One guy was in medical school and he sold his blood in order to pay for a consultation with me. He was terrified. Doctors are at risk because they have these horrible they have to fill out these forms, and they're tiny font. They're very, very, very involved. So the doctors have to spend a lot of time on the computer filling out these horrible forms for insurance purposes and all this other stuff. They get injured. They do. And I've had a lot of experiences where I'm in the, I'm seeing the doctor for one reason or another. And, they find out what I do. I said, well, I've written a couple of books on repetitive strain injury. And recently, two of them, one of them said, he suddenly, their whole visage changes, their whole attitude changes. And they say, well, yeah, I have a little cervical radiculopathy. That means they've got a little something going on in the neck. And you can tell that they're starting to think, maybe I should be worried about this. And I send them to my channel. I send them to my book, hoping that they'll, lay off whatever it is they're doing. And then, I also say, by the way, your keyboard's too high. And you really ought to consider, not using the mouse. And, you can't, I'm overstepping already, but they do listen. It's really interesting. And then one of them, he was an urgent care doctor. And he said, well, what about splinting? And I said, it can lead to so many problems, including something really bad called, well, they used to call it reflex sympathetic dysfunction or dystrophy. Now it's CRIPS, complex regional pain syndrome. But it doesn't happen to everybody, but that's also another reason why you could get it would be a carpal tunnel surgery, or, these weird, people get it weird ways. But you don't want to splint because you're not using your hands normally. It's okay at night if you want to keep your wrist straight so that it doesn't wake you up at 4 a.m. But you really need to be under a doctor's guidance. You shouldn't be self-splinting. You shouldn't be splinting while you're at the computer, because then you're working against the splint. It can lead to atrophy and lack of fluid return and all these other things. And people, they just go and buy a splint. He says, well, what about for comfort? And I'm thinking, well, I don't know. I think you need very careful, short-term, judicious care before you go down that road. Sometimes you need a splint. There are occasions, but you need a qualified, knowledgeable doctor to be guiding you before you go down that road. Anything else, Jonathan?
Actually, I can't remember. I should have taken notes. There was something that you had said, and I wanted to add to it.
Well, it could have been about the study on the patients who weren't being listened to. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
And timely.
Yeah. It was, I'm not sure if it was that or something about, it's really important in terms of when you're doing research, it really helps to actually see patients. And I just find a lot of the studies out there, they're not considering, first off, a lot of the studies don't even look at injured workers. They look at sort of what's called primary prevention before you get injured, and they do studies on that. But that's even harder to compare to injured workers. So I think the best mix would be a researcher who also treats patients. That would be the best.
Yes. Okay, we have a question. What lessons might be learned from the past that have been forgotten? Oh my God. Read, I think it's Ramazzini. They knew, doctors millennia ago, well, not millennia, but hundreds of years ago, they knew about the disease of scribes, focal dystonia, writer's cramp. They knew. And then they were saying, don't stop using your hands, just use them normally, but don't keep doing what you're doing. So this is not new. They have been, and I have a beautiful slide from the public library on Fifth Avenue. There's a picture of a monk with a slanted surface, and he has the most beautiful pen hold you've ever seen. and he's at this thing, and the ergonomics, the slanted surface is up to him, so he can use his shoulder and his whole thing to do the calligraphy. So they also have one of typesetters. They were so much smarter about both ergonomics, that means make the tool or the work situation fit you rather than you straining yourself to fit it. And they knew about repetitive strain injury way back then. And things have not changed much. That's a good question. Thank you for that question. If there's anything else, oh, there's Pixel Pia. Hi, nice to see you. Thank you for coming. So nice. Well, as I said, this will make a very good episode for your insomnia. So if you have trouble sleeping at night, just go to my channel and click on the studies about RSI. And actually, it may not be the best one because maybe I was too energized, and it'll keep you awake. But Alexandria and I were talking, and she said, Deborah, you should make a recording so that people can fall asleep to your voice. And it's something I'm very good at doing. So I'm actually thinking about doing that, a breathing meditation. And I will keep you posted. Thank you for the idea, Alexandria. You can be my test subject, and Jonathan too, if you want to. And Exploring Canada's here. Hi, Karen. Oh, so good to see you. Well, if you have any questions, ask them now, because we're about ready to. Oh, international studies are examples of what? Moving pictures. I mean, a lot of these studies are from other countries. The one about patients not listening is a British study. And there are 14 different countries represented on my RSI patient bill of rights. I'm making it global. The World Health Organization, which is part of the UN, I'm hoping that will be the target people that I can approach to do something about RSI. But I need you. I need all of you to help me with this. Keep me company, not be so I'm not doing this all by myself. And I mean, Martin Luther King wasn't the only one who had a dream. I have a dream too. I mean, I have visions of going to Washington with a whole mall full of people with RSI, just wearing sandwich boards, because they're not going to be able to lift a picket sign, but they could wear maybe a sandwich board or a t-shirt saying, "Stop RSI, do something, Washington, do something, world." So Moving Pictures said excellent, but I don't know what you were referring to. So if you could just tell me what it was you thought was excellent, that'll make me feel like this was useful to you. Did you record this? Yes, I recorded it. Yes, if you want to find my channel, go to YouTube and do the @ Deborah Quilter. It'll take you to repetitive strain injury, because there's a lot of stuff on repetitive strain injury that isn't me. Oh, thank you, Moving Pictures. She said everything here was excellent. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So unless anybody has anything else, I think we can sign off. And thank you so much for coming. Jonathan, thank you for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to be part of your group occasionally.
And thank you, Deborah, for presenting. I learned a ton. So, and I loved one of your upcoming live streams about what old timers can teach. I think that's brilliant. I didn't think of that, but that would be a really good topic for our group as well. Yeah, what old timers, the tricks of the trade, right?
Yeah. Well, we can talk about the timing. I mean, I'm full of ideas for things for live streams, because what's so nice is that it's a community. There's a nice community going on here, and it's all over the world. We've got people from, on the channel from all over the place. So we're building a nice community, and I've got to say, it's just been wonderful. And and I'm enjoying our conversations too, because Jonathan and I talk shop, and we talk about all the things that are needing improvement, shall we say, to be diplomatic. But maybe someday we'll do something together. But it's really nice to feel the support, because if you have RSI, it can be very isolating. You're not at work, you're not interacting with other people, and other people very often don't understand what you're going through, which is another topic that I want to address. How to talk about RSI, what to do when people give you useless and unsolicited advice. It can be very trying. Well, have you done this? Have you tried that? Trust me. I've done. And then you feel like you're being blamed for not getting better, when in fact, it's what you said, the tissue just can't hold up anymore. You keep getting injured and re-injured in that cycle. So, it'd be wonderful if there was some quick fix, but it's complicated. Even if there were, like there is some study about tendonitis treatment that is on my podcast, they might be able to repair and regrow tendon. But not everybody has tendonitis. People could have a nerve injury. And then, they get all intertwined together. So it's just not a simple problem. And we use our hands for everything. So anyway, take care of the hands you have, because you can't use your other pair of hands to do what you want to do. That's what I'm going to have on the coffee mug. So anyway, I think it's time to go. Thanks again to Jonathan for inviting me. Hello, all you beautiful people at the Work Injury Support Group. So nice to see you. And in the replay, so happy to see you. And we will catch you next time.
Thanks, Deborah.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.